JJ, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to chat with you about all interesting topics. But before we dive into that, can you tell my audience a little bit about a little snapshot of your career story and to what you're up to today?
Yes. Well, I would never ever think I would ever say I was a three-time author because I started programming routers after college, but I had a share fare of cleaning windows, babysitting, working in retail before I went to college. And when I got to college, I'm like, I don't want any more minimum wage jobs. Like, I need to make some real money. And they said, I'm like, which degrees get hired? And they said, well, the tech degree, everyone out of the tech degree gets hired. And I was like, great, I will learn it, whatever I have to do. And at the time, I didn't know I was dyslexic. So coding was really challenging, but I figured out like how to make it work. And I spent a lot of my first 20 years in Silicon Valley. And then when I started having kids and saying yes in a lot of ways, then I realized how hard it is for women, working women, to keep everything going. And I had a real personal passion to just figure it out not only for myself but also for my daughter. But I guess the universe had other plans because it kind of blew up to books and a lot more than I ever envisioned for myself.
And so was there was it just the kind of the having of the children that made you like start to see things differently, or was there something that happened in your career where you're like, okay, this is a time to make a pivot into what you're doing today?
I really wasn't planning to pivot. I always had aspirations to make it to the executive suite. In I was in software at the time, but I do think at the age of 35 for women, things really start to change. You really have to know the difference of working in your career and on your career, which I didn't really know. I had great mentors, but I really didn't have enough sponsors. And so for me, I think a lot of things came true all at once. One, I got super busy in my personal life. And two, I didn't have the right sponsorship I needed at that particular time to figure out how to maneuver the professional landscape.
Hmm. So talk to me a little bit about that's an interesting point. I'm 36, and I'm also at times where I'm looking to start a family, and I also have a lot of questions about my career in general. So talk to me about it working in your career and then on your career. Is that what you said, right?
Yeah, there's a real difference. There's a difference of getting your things done every day, every week, every quarter, right? That's like working in your career. Working on your career is, are you aligned to the right projects? Do you have executive exposure? Do you have the right partners? Are you saying yes to the right work? Do you have real sponsors, people that are in rooms that you're not invited to that can get you on the short list or connecting you to people that are going to make the next difference in your business?
Hmm. That's a really interesting point because I feel that we just go all the time, and it's almost like unless you stop and have that conversation with yourself, you're likely to just time goes by and you get so busy, especially for those people that have families. So what is it? What is one way to, I guess, force yourself, not force yourself, but to remind yourself to pause? Because I'm sure people when they listen to it, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, but then again they go back to their lives. So what can one do?
Two things come to mind. So one, there's a personal thing, and two, there's a professional thing. So the personal thing is mind your yeses. What are you saying yes to? Who's asking you to say yes? Does the request align to where you are now or where you want to have impact next? And does it give you the right energy? There's of course plenty of things you have to do, but there's a lot of things that people do that they really don't have to do, but they do because they want to be liked or they want people to make sure that they ask them again, or they don't want to feel guilty. And so they say yes. And we give our time away to a lot of things that really don't align to things that really matter to us at the end of the day. It really matters more to our ego. So that's the
Mm.
first thing. The second thing is the projects. When you think about what people are asking you to do, like you need to understand, like, is it the right commitment? What type of attention and amount of time does it need? Does it align to metrics that are important to you? Is it going to give you the executive exposure you need? Does it have P&L experience? What type of sponsorships might be part of this experience that can help you get to the next step or open the next door? And so I think you need to think not only about like where am I aligning my time, but am I aligning my time to projects that are going to be instrumental in my next step or achieving the goals that I've set forth for myself?
Mm. I can imagine that also can be quite scary because once you start asking yourself those kind of questions, and if you're starting to see that it's not actually aligning, which means that sometimes you might need to make drastic change, and that could be in your personal or professional lives. And so like where does one go from there? I guess how to overcome that fear. I would imagine, I don't know, in your experience, has that been a like a challenge for a lot of people?
Ha, that's so funny because what I've talked to date with you right now is my second book, Accelerate Your Impact, which is really about how to maneuver the professional landscape. But my third book, Seeking, really dives into the self doubt and the fear. Because honestly, I could tell you all the strategies, I can give you all the charts, but if you don't dive inside and do the inside work of like, how do you talk to yourself? How do you support yourself? And do you turn yourself down before you even get the opportunity to leap forward? That's where it really matters. That self talk is one of the most instrumental things, not only in your work, but in your life.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. I mean, it's just so hard. And like, I always think when people think about self-talk, I always like, when I find myself in certain situations where I'm just harsh on myself, I'm like, would I talk to a friend like that? And I always like that tends to do the trick for me. But there's something else that people can do, because I imagine a lot of it is like years and years of conditioning, or there's guilt trip as well, right? So there's fear around guilt trip of like, oh, like, I'm being selfish, or I don't know if I can do this, etc. So like, what has been your experience with people that go through that?
Oh my gosh, I have so many chapters on this because again, it's like after meeting with so many women's groups all over really the world, you just realize how the self-talk is really the reason that we have few women at really strategic tables. I mean, my goal is to get more women at more tables. And the only way that's going to happen is if we really monitor what we say to ourselves. And then we have interceptions or intersection points that we can intercept the conversation we're having with ourselves. Because most of us are led by fear. And I have a whole chapter on like, what are your fears? Because it's really not like I'm afraid of snakes or I'm afraid of heights. It's like real fears. Like I'm afraid of looking stupid. I'm afraid of people thinking I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm afraid people won't think I belong. I'm afraid I won't get promoted. I mean, the list goes on and on. And these are all things I collected from women that I worked with in different conference rooms and different women's groups. And I feel like once we lay out those fears and you kind of check the ones that apply to you, you can diffuse some of the power because a lot of us think it's only us. But in a lot of work that I do in groups, which is where I do most of my work, we realize that we're more alike than we're different. And we all have fears. We all have self doubt. And most of us are telling ourselves no first.
Hmm. And I'm curious on the flip side. So there's a lot of women. I'm in tech, so I'm a woman in tech, and I speak with a lot of women in tech that are really trying to like kind of grow in their career, and it has its own set of challenges, as some of the things you're describing. But then on the flip side, do you run into women that maybe just want to kind of focus on the family, for example, and then they have fears of that, because then there's other fears that go into that, right? It's like, well, what happens when my kids are done with school, or or not the school, but they're done and they're out of the house, what happens to me then, and what if things don't work out in my marriage, or whatever it may be. Have you seen the flip side of fear on the other side?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I've spent most of my time in tech too, and I actually work with a ton of tech companies. And I feel like the fears can be endless, literally endless. And so, really documenting what are the fears that are holding you back? Like, what is the talk track? And I think for many of us, we really have to get in the present moment, which for me was almost impossible because I had always praised myself on being productive, thinking around corners, being an A+ deliverer. And when you're doing that, you're constantly grinding. What is the next thing I need to do? Where are the gaps? What can I get ahead on? And it really kind of robs you of being in the present moment. And so it wasn't until I was essentially forced to take mindfulness classes that I actually had even an opportunity to understand what was happening inside me, which was completely oblivious to me.
Hmm. And for you personally, how do you define success today?
That's so funny. I used to chase the success oasis, is how I call it, right? It's always like just almost, you could almost get there and then it moves and it moves and it moves. And I used to think it was really around title, money, access, invitation, exposure, the invites, the rooms you get in. I used to think it was all of those things. But after a lot of self exploration and spiritual alignment and mindfulness, I really realized that success is not only oasis, but it's unrealistic.
Hmm. Do you feel that it's just one of those things that just comes with experience, and kind of just as we grow. Because it's funny enough, yesterday I was at an event. I was invited to this networking event, and I haven't been to one in a while, but I used to be like the networker. Like in my 20s, I used to be so social, etc. And now, I'm 36, and now when I go to these events, I'm like, man, like I just like, and I used to define success of like, for me, it was like, oh, like I get to go to all these events, and you get to get all these cool parties, and like, these like corporate things. And now I'm like, yesterday I was at this event, it was so loud. I mean, the event was great overall, a great group of people. But I was like, this is just not for me anymore, And I always wonder, I'm like, why did I was like, was it just what I'm trying to get at is that, is it just part of life that you just have to go through those experiences to understand that that's not for you? Or maybe at a certain age, you just like kind of like, yeah, I'm kind of a little bit, I'd just rather have an intimate dinner with somebody and build relationships in that way. Cause that's where I am right now. Like I was telling my boyfriend yesterday, you think, I was like, I think I'd just rather do a small dinner with like a group of people I want to build relationships with versus going to these big events. It's loud, too many people. You don't really make that good of a connection with others. So what do you think about that? Do you think it's just a matter of time that you get to that? Or is it like, can somebody in their 20s come to that conclusion? Because I wish I did.
Well, I will tell you that each of us have our own makeup. I use a lot of tools beyond the Myers-Briggs and the Strength Finders. I actually use birth charts and human design and Enneagrams, and many others to kind of figure out more about who I am. So I would tell you from like a birth chart perspective, you have more in your seventh house, you love one-on-one relationships. If you're more in your 11th house, you love more communities. And there's also ways we just like to engage. How do we like to engage with people? So I do think you may change the way you like to engage. To me, it sounds like you just want more quality time with people rather than, I just want to collect LinkedIn or business cards, LinkedIn connection or business cards. I do think you evolve. I just turned 50 and I have evolved many, many, many times. And I think you just have to like step into where you're at. And if it's not for you anymore, being honest with yourself and creating the ways you want to engage is a great way to nurture your soul and align with what you need at the time.
Mm. And how do you see mindfulness play a role in coming to these realizations, maybe about yourself?
Well, I would say that a lot of people would tell me, "Oh, you have to meditate. Every key tech executive and beyond meditates. You have to do that." But when I first started meditating, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I would like organize my grocery list and create a presentation and do all these things when I'm supposed to be meditating. I was working through my to-do list. I just found it a different way to like work. And it wasn't until I took a John Kabat-Zinn class at a local studio here where I live, and I had to start a couple times, but I learned that mindfulness is being mindful of whatever your thought may be, but not holding on to any one thought. So you're not in a state of designing, creating, preparing, doing. You are in a state of being. And being is just being aware of what crosses your mind, but not grabbing onto it, dissecting it, reorganizing it, and creating an action out of it. And for me, I didn't know how to show up that way in my life.
Hmm. That's interesting. I go back and forth on the meditation and mindfulness, but I see every time I do some kind of mindfulness practice, whether it is meditation, whether it is just going for a walk and kind of just being aware and present with myself and my thoughts and etc. But I tend to go kind of back and forth. But every time I do it, I see such a huge difference, and I'm like, why don't I do it more? And so I have this. So maybe it's a sign that we're having this conversation now. I'm curious about the mind-body connection as well. So talk to me a little bit about that, because now there's been a lot of research, especially in like neuroscience and behavior change, about really just that mind-body connection, whether it's your physical well-being connected to the gut, right, to the health of your gut, to your mind, etc. So have you had experience with that? Do you use this in your practice?
Oh, yes. I feel like the mindfulness for me has really given me the ability to be in the present moment, and I can feel my body, like I'm in my body, because before I used to live outside my body. And in fact, the reason I actually wrote my third book, Seeking, is because I spoke at so many conferences, and I can't tell you how many I went to, and I saw like women are essentially sitting outside their body, right? They're working so hard in the masculine energy that it resides in corporate America that they've completely disconnected from their knowing. They've disconnected from self because they're out with very masculine energy. We're all masculine and feminine energy. But masculine is really the producing, the doing, the striving, the reaching. The feminine is more of the knowing, the collaborating, the oneness with Mother Nature. And I feel like corporate America is so lean so heavily to the masculine that we have forgotten how to connect with our knowing and our oneness.
Hmm. That's such a good point because I go to so many corporate events and it's just like, and I always joke about it because I'm like, it's just black and gray suits. It's like everybody looks the same. Very, very, very few women. And you're right. And the women, a lot of the women that are there, it's almost like trying to compete with the male and with the male counterparts. And I'm always just like, the reason there's a lot of, again, research and etc. about female leadership is because of all these other things that we're able to bring to the table, whether it's feminine energy or masculine energy, but it's really that just our ability to know and to feel and to connect, etc. as women. And it's always interesting to me to observe women that try to fit in, and I used to be one of them as well, try to fit in with that masculine energy and try to turn that on more than just being ourselves and being the feminine, with the feminine energy, right? And it's just it's interesting to observe. It's
It
interesting to,
is. And I mean, I'll go out on a limb and say we need more feminine energy in the world.
yeah. Tell me more about that. What makes you say that?
Well, I would say I think the world's a little lopsided right now. I mean, we're just so hungry, driven, ego, money, success, numbers. It's exhausting. It's like exhausting and it's so unhealthy for the soul because it's like it's never enough. And I feel like so many people live in the never enough, I'm so busy world, right?
Mm,
They're striving, stretching, reaching. And at the same time, they're busy, busy, busy. And I feel like we've lost touch with things that can bring us a lot of joy and connection,
mm,
but they require us to really move more towards just the present moment of just experiencing what you're in.
mm. And have you seen the shift just over the last, many years that you've been doing this with social media come into play, and especially having kids and stuff like that? Like, do you see them being impacted by all this outside noise about what success should look like? I have younger sisters and I see them being like younger as in one is 20, one is 25. And I see them so impacted by the idea of success and beauty because of social media. And I just wonder if you've had experience with that. How do you overcome it, especially with your own kids?
Yeah, it's undeniable, right? It's undeniable. And it's just like, and watching how people are like bringing their Instagram pages into their dermatologists and other doctors and being like, I want to look like my avatar. It's like kind of crazy. But I think that our generation of kids are smarter than that. And I feel like they can see through it a little bit better than we probably give them credit for.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. I think that the what are they, the generation Y, the ones that are like teenagers now, basically. I think that they are a little bit more aware of the messaging versus the 20-something-year-olds, whatever the generation they are. So I think the Gen Zs, I guess, yeah, they are. I think they're probably the most impacted by that, because I do see the younger, like the 12, 13, 14-year-olds today are a little bit more like pushing back and have a little bit more of their own authentic personalities. So yeah, you might be right about that. It's just very interesting to see, right? Because if I would have grown up with the social media, I probably would have been the most insecure person because I'm very sensitive to many things, and it's especially as a kid, like I just can't imagine. And I feel that that's the future generations, and that's what we're feeding. We're feeding that nonstop kind of social media world that's not real. And I think that has a lot of impact and the adults that then go into corporates that then leading these companies. So it's let's see where that goes, but I hope that this generation coming up is going to do better than us before them.
Yeah, and you're seeing it already. I mean, they don't want to work like we did. We would just work and work and work. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. I'm done at 5. Like I feel like they are much more social beings in the sense that they're not gonna live to work like our generation, or at least my generation did.
Hmm. And there's been a lot of kind of conversation now around spirituality and that mind-body connection and mindfulness and all these things that we're talking about. What do you think sparked that? Do you think it was the pandemic? Because I feel like it all started coming out right after the pandemic, which is really scary because that means it's the first time in I don't know how long we actually all collectively paused and then all these things come to fruition to what we see today.
Well, I don't believe in accidents. I'll say that right now. I think that the pandemic was a little bit of an awakening. Some of us have had bigger awakenings than others, but I do believe that you're seeing right now. Like I was at a big women in tech event last week, and I was speaking. We had a lot of recruiters there that were in tech, and they're like, people just do not want to come to the office 5 days. Like they will come too, and employers are trying to figure out how to handle this. And so I do think that things are shifting at a much bigger and higher level than we can really make sense of, but I do not believe it was on accident.
Mm. Yeah, I see a lot of candidates that I talk to. I do some recruitment as well, and a lot of candidates that I talk to definitely want that flexibility. But it looks like the market is kind of stabilizing a little bit. So we're moving away from fully remote and more into hybrid across board, I think, as a lot of companies, because there's that benefit to connecting with others, right? There's that benefit of seeing each other at least like once a week or something, or maybe once a month. I don't know, whatever makes sense for one. But yeah, that's interesting. What are some things you're most excited about in this next year or so?
Well, as I mentioned before, I just feel like when you're more present and you're like really in your life. Now, it's not every hour, every day, but there's moments in each hour that we can just really be in the moment. And I really use my intuition more than I ever have. I ask myself questions, I ask for universal help. And I feel like the more aware I am of my life and what's happening around me, the more I see. And I get messages all different kinds of ways. Like, for example, like in 2016, I was walking out of a conference and I was asked to bring the women together outside. So I'm leaving a big convention center and I keep getting this message, bring the women together outside, because women were like in this room and they just did not seem grounded. They were like all over the place and they're sitting outside their bodies. And my initial response to myself in this message was like, yeah, I don't think that message is for me. I
Mm.
don't think that's a message. But fast forward to 2018, I continued to get that message in different ways. People would say, oh, I could really use a retreat, or do you know of any retreats? And then I get a message like, you should have a retreat. Well, I had never been to a retreat. I've never had a retreat, but I kept getting the message. So I went to a friend of mine who I would say is a spiritual guide. So she's different than a business coach. She just kind of uses her intuition to guide people. And she said, JJ, why have you not done this yet? You're obviously getting this special message,
Mm.
which I thought it was very confusing. And I was like, I just can't do that. And I said, because I don't know what to build. I don't know how to do it. I've never been to a retreat. And she said, build what you want to go to. Build what you want to go to.
Mm.
So 3 months later, I had a women in business retreat. Most all women were in tech because that was my network.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought them together by Lake Erie. I had an organic chef. I had a tapping expert. I had an oils person. I had people talking about stress and connection and did some meditations. And just last week, I had my 8th event. And I would have never expected that to be the case, but I feel like I had created space to listen to my whispers.
Mm. I wanted to back up to something you said it a couple of times. When you see women at these events and they're kind of sitting outside of their bodies, what does that look like? Like, what is that? Is it an energy field that you feel, or does it? Can you actually physically kind of see the posture, or whatever, maybe?
So it's not physical, but I can just like when I'm looking in the audience, I don't feel like people are grounded. I feel like they're just trying to be what is expected of them.
Hmm.
And in that effort, they've sort of removed their ability to really tap into their natural gifts because they're working so hard to be what other people expect them to be.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, because you can kind of see it if you I don't know what's the word, like maybe not physically, but yeah, you can kind of just feel that energy in the room. You're absolutely right. Like I'm just thinking of events and it's kind of sad if you think about it because it's like like it's almost like we confuse corporate world. It's like you have to be this persona, this serious, guarded persona. That's what it seems like it taught us. At least that's what it sounds like what you're saying, and how I've also observed in conferences. But we're just there as humans, like to connect, right? To share knowledge and information, to ask questions, etc. It's interesting how who started all that? Let's put it that way. Who started this whole notion that we have to show up a certain way in a corporate setting, right? So it's interesting. Before I ask you my last questions, I wanted to ask if you can share with the audience, where do you hang out at online?
So I hang out just like you at LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. I really feel like my space is women in business. I have a large women's group, and I'm working side by side, and the retreats that I create are together we seek. It's not together I teach you to seek, it's together we seek, because I'm seeking just like you. I'm constantly looking for the best way to show up every day, how to align to my gifts, how to find different ways to embrace what I have to offer the world and make it so. And I feel like the more honest we can be with each other, women specifically, the easier it is for us to step forward before we're ready. Most women wait to over 100% before they do anything in fear of being, looking ridiculous or not being able to do it as they expect they should. And in reality, it really undermines us because it makes us feel like we have to wait till we're already there before we can get started. And I just feel like we as women need to start at 50 and 60% and figure it out. We can do it. We do it every day at our house. We do it every day in our life. And we have to trust. We have to trust our knowing. We have to trust our connection. We have to trust that we are more alike than we are different, and that we not only like can create a space at the table, but the people at the table need us to be at the table, because we need to create a more unified approach to life. And all these things that are happening in corporate and in life and with women are no accident. We need more women to be fired up enough to be like, you know what, 60% is good, 40% is good. I'm going for it.
Hmm. And I'm curious about your experience in this. There's a lot of kind of discussions around women and bringing women together generally, right? Like you hear a lot of that, and there's specific women focused groups, and I love seeing that. But what I still don't see as much is then translation of these experiences back into the corporate world. What I mean by that is that as women, we tend to be less supportive of each other in the corporate setting versus like, yes, we can go to a retreat together and we can have a great time, and we can, and the aim is to kind of walk away and continue to support each other in different settings. But I still see, and I see this in experience with other women as well, that men tend to be more supportive in a corporate space versus women to women. Do you see that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Not everyone believes this, and I might be overstepping, but our souls have memories. And it's not on accident that at certain times in our soul's history, we have been pitted against each other, and our soul remembers that. And if there's women in your life that aren't supporting you, you have to realize that that is their energy and their thing. It really doesn't have anything to do with you. And there are plenty of women that support women that are not feeling that type of energy. So if you happen to be in situations with women that are not supporting you, the best thing you can do is like send love and light to that person, because what they are dealing with internally is much more than you could ever imagine. And it's really more of the self. They beat themselves up. They're very tough on themselves. They never think they're good enough, and they portray that energy out to you. And all you need to do is be like, that is not my energy. I send you a lot of light and love and hope you can heal that energy. And I'm going to move on to other souls and other energy that are much more supportive.
Yeah, I never thought about it from that perspective. I've been lucky to have some supportive women in my life that are like my mentors, etc. But generally speaking, I still see that, women that are just kind of like they're going to like massive competition mode, and you're like, we can all go together, we don't have to compete. There's plenty of room for everybody. So
Yeah, it's just like, can you only imagine what they're saying to themselves? If they say that
yeah.
outwardly, like it's just got to be heck, you're very hostile inside of them. And I just think just send them love and light and move on.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. So my last question to you is, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
That's such a good question. I think, does this feel right? Like, does this feel right?
Does
I
this
think so
feel
many of us make decisions because we think we should, or we could, or we want our boss to like us, or we want someone to invite us. And I think sometimes we just need to be really present and be like, does this feel right now? And when you bring your decision from your heart, from your head to your heart, and you say, does this feel right?
mm,
You generally get an initial response. And I think following that, you can't go wrong.
yeah, does this feel right? I love that. Well, that's what we're going to leave our audience with today. Does this feel right? Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you. I'm so glad we're connected. Thank you for this.